Freshly painted, beautiful parts. Let's get this engine put together tonight. In the last video, we did the rotating assembly, and after that video, Jason and I managed to get our reverse gear installed, the front gear housing, and a bunch of other miscellaneous stuff. Today, I'm gonna try to get the cylinder head installed, and maybe even some of the peripherals, depending on how late we go into the night. I'm really motivated to make a dent on this thing, so I want to see how far I can get. Man, this cylinder head looks nice with the masking tape off. Fresh paint does wonders for all these parts, especially if you take the time to clean them up nice. I gotta get new valves and a couple new parts installed in this head, and so that's what I'm gonna work on next once we're done cleaning up the deck and everything. According to the manual, we've got to double check our valve seats, guides, all that fun stuff. I'll probably do that off camera, but I will show you a couple basic things to check so you kind of know if these heads are good or not. These valves were burnt, so we're going to replace them and just double check everything else. Here's the manual, and we're going to check for flatness. This is really important to make sure your head isn't warped, and you will need a straight edge that's actually straight, and a feeler gauge to do this. When I say straight edge, I mean like a precision straight edge. This is a Starrett straight edge. It's used to actually check for flatness, especially on cylinder heads. This one's a particularly large one, but it's the only one I have. If you don't have one of these, that's okay. You can use like a metal ruler as long as it's straight, because you're going to be using your feeler gauge along the edge of this thing, and if it's bent or damaged in some way, the feeler gauge might slide underneath. So this feeler gauge, I think it was 0.005 of an inch or something that the manual said to check for. And then you saw the diagram in the picture of how they wanted me to lay the straight edge out and all the areas to check. So you're going to check multiple angles of this head just to make sure nothing's warped, nothing's damaged in any way, and that feeler gauge does not slide under at any point. Now, of course, there's a variety of other checks that I did off camera. The manual kind of tells you what they want you to check. It's more than just flatness. Everything's all cleaned up. Everything's flat. There's no cracks. I've cleaned up all the dirt and soot, and now it's time to get my new valves and all of their pieces installed. But first I need to lap these valves to mate with their valve seats, because they won't be a perfect fit against these valve seats. So I'm going to use some lapping compound here, and we're going to grind them in so they have a really good seating surface. If you guys checked out the earlier video as we were tearing this engine apart, you could see that this engine had real burnt valves from excess fuel. And so the valves were in tough shape. Could they have been cleaned up? Absolutely. We decided to just run with new valves and seats and everything. And so that's why we're putting it in. This lapping compound, basically what it is like a gritty, like sandy paste, and you put it on the edge of the valve and then spin the valve in its hole, and it's essentially going to file down that mating surface between the valve seat and the valve sealing surface. And then once you're done grinding it until it's smooth, then you clean it all up and you can then install your valve. Even on brand new valves, brand new seats, The two mating surfaces were not machined together. The valves were one batch at Yanmar, and the seats and everything were another batch. So I always lap them at least a little bit just to make sure they're actually sealing really well, despite being brand new. And I'll show you once I grind this one in, you'll actually see a line on that valve sealing surface that shows me it wasn't quite perfectly mated, even though it's all brand new. So that's why I do this, just to make sure we have good compression, because it would suck to pull this head back off. There's the line. You can actually see kind of that light gray line, and it's all cleaned up, ready for install. Rebuilding cylinder heads is so tedious, especially when you have to lap valves. Sometimes it really feels like it takes forever. One thing that's super important is just make sure everything is cleaned up, especially all of that lapping compound. We do not want any abrasive material behind our valves, around our valves. When we start up the engine, we don't want it circulating in the oil. That will do a ton of damage. So that's why you see me with the brake clean, cleaning everything up once the lapping is done. And then I'm using my valve installation tool to get it back on. This is actually an antique, like 100-year-old tool that I forgot I had. And man, it makes installing these valves so nice. So I'm going to get this put together, and then we'll move on to the next step. Now that the cylinder head's all rebuilt and ready to go, time to clean up the deck. Just double check that I did in fact get all the residue from the head gasket off, and that our liners and cylinders are nice and clean. And then we can put the cylinder head on. I always check and double check this stuff. You never know. Sometimes dust is floating around. Sometimes chunks of stuff ends up, where you don't want it. So you always want to double check before you close things up, because this is the last time we're going to see these cylinders wide open. And so I will always push that. This particular engine, we actually got really lucky in terms of it didn't need to be machined. It didn't need to really be sent out. It didn't have any cracks. It's not being rebuilt for that. And so we didn't have to, it wasn't particularly dirty. So everything we're doing is here in the shop, and that's why, I'm just trying to be as careful as I can. But even if I had sent it out to a machine shop, I would still be doing this even after it returned. It doesn't matter whether it has a machine surface or not. As long as it passes all the specs and that you keep it clean as you're assembling it, you'll be good to go. One of the things this engine is going to get is some new cylinder head bolts. Yanmar loves to bag these things in individual bags, and they just take forever to get every piece out. Every bolt is in its own bag. And so I've got to take these out, get them all oiled up and ready to go. Head bolts typically can be, most of the time they can be reused once. They're torque to yield bolts, meaning they stretch and apply like a clamping force on the head gasket. And so you don't want to like reuse them over and over again. Typically when you're working on bigger like commercial engines, the manual will actually give you a length, a spec of length that they want the bolt to be under. And if it's longer than that, you need to replace it. If in doubt, replace it just to be safe. You're never going to hurt anything. Yanmar doesn't have anything about replacing head bolts, although it's not a bad idea, especially if the head bolts are cruddy or they've been used or reused and you know that. So we're replacing them here, and they'll be fresh and ready for torquing. Now I can almost hear some of you in the comments. You're going to see me start these by hand with my ratchet, make sure I've got good thread engagement. And then I'm going to actually run them in with my impact. However, I am not impacting them in. They're not tight, they're just touching. Now I'm going to torque them. So our first setting is about 36 foot-pounds. I'm going to use the twin beam here. And then we'll move up to the bigger torque wrench for our final torque. Alright, let's make sure this thing turns over. I have actually assembled an engine in the past. It was a Kubota engine where the head gasket from the factory was the incorrect thickness, and that resulted in the pistons hitting the bottom of the head. So, like I mentioned in the last video, every step we're going to turn the engine over. You already know what's happening here. More bags. A little assembly lube on each of our valve stems, and then we'll put the caps on top of the stems, and we'll be ready to put our rocker assembly together. The only thing left from our disassembly that needs to stay in order is the push rods. Everything else, the caps, the valves, the springs, all that is brand new, so it doesn't need to stay in any sort of order. However, the push rods are still the original push rods, so we want to make sure to put them back where they belong, and then we'll get everything adjusted. slow down here to point out that as you put this rocker assembly in place, make sure each one of your push rods is completely engaged, because as you tighten up the bolts to the rocker assembly, you're going to be opening valves, as this is part of your valve timing. And so slowly tighten everything up. I've actually seen bent push rods as a result of, having a misengagement, just like this one. And just keep an eye on it as you slowly tighten things down. I tend to tighten from the outside or the inside moving out, and just slowly work it until the bases of this rocker assembly are flush against the top of my head. All right, valves are in and functioning. Now it's time to adjust our valve timing. So we're going to refer to our manual here. That's our spec, and we're going to get the tools. Let's get what we need, and I will show you how to adjust valves on this 4-cylinder. First of all, we need a paint pen, a 12mm wrench for this particular engine, our ratchet and socket to turn the engine over, flathead screwdriver, and of course, our feeler gauge. We're going to begin by just making a stationary mark on our engine. In this case, right here works just fine. You can mark anything you want, doesn't matter. All this is a reference point to be able to line up our crank pulley with that mark as we're working through valves. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this engine over, in this case clockwise, and I'm watching for the rockers to go down. I'm watching for just one, this one in particular. And I'm going to turn this engine over until that rocker is all the way down. And I'm going to mark my crank pulley right there. And then I'm going to make one complete revolution of the engine, and that rocker should be loose and ready to adjust. So we're making our complete revolution here. And once we get back to our mark, that rocker should be loose, and it is. Now we can adjust it. In this case, this and pretty much every rocker I adjusted today was very, very loose, mostly because we have all brand new components. So we're going to have to tighten everything up. Right now, I'm tightening up that lock nut, and I'm going to use my flathead screwdriver to adjust the tension on my feeler gauge. And I am looking for a light drag, and when I loosen the flathead screwdriver on my adjusting screw, it will get looser, and when I tighten it, it will get tighter. And I want an even drag on that feeler gauge. And once I get that, I'm using my left hand to hold the flathead in place as I tighten up my lock screw, and all should be good. That valve's now all done. We're going to turn the engine over until I see another rocker going down. And I will do the same process every time. So in this case, this rocker's on its way down. I'm going to do the exact same thing. Now, as I do this, those of you with adjusting experience may be screaming at your television screen right now saying, hey, that's not how it's done. Well, there's actually multiple ways of adjusting valves. I use this method mostly because most of the time I'm working on engines that don't have an even number of cylinders, or cylinders that have companion cylinders. A lot of times I'm working on 3 cylinders, 2 cylinders, that sort of thing. And so this method works on any engine with any number of cylinders. For some people it may take longer. In this case, I'm so used to doing it, it really isn't any faster or slower, and it does the same job, and it works just fine. When the engine's in the boat, sometimes you can't actually see the timing marks on your flywheel, which is how the manual wants you to do it. So this is the only way you can do it. And so that's what has determined my approach to adjusting valves. However, those of you who know better, yes, there are multiple ways of doing this, and this is just one of them. This process is a really critical process, and anytime you do any sort of top-end work, whether it's a top-end rebuild, a complete overhaul like what we're doing, anything where you're messing with the valves or the rocker assembly for any reason, you need to check the adjustment. Adjusting valves also takes place as part of your regular maintenance, and typically most manufacturers will call for checking your valves every 1,500 or so hours. And I would strongly advise, if you don't know what you're doing, you're going to want to have a professional who's familiar with this process, because if you make a mistake and screw up your valve timing, you can have a catastrophic failure. So be careful, make sure you're confident in doing this before you try doing it, and, keep turning your engine over by hand to make sure everything's good as you move along, and you should be just fine. If you guys would like an in-depth video on valve adjustment, I'd be happy to do one. Just let me know in the comments. Well, our engine is finally covered up. It is rotating beautifully. After adjusting valves, we actually built some compression. I managed to get a few more peripherals installed. My camera decided to die. It is 4:30 in the morning, and I am ready to go to bed. Tonight's all-nighter was well worth it, though. We made a huge dent. I will see you guys in the next video. Thank you so much for watching. I'm thinking this one has the right idea. It's been a long night. Good night, everyone.